2 weeks ago, I entered a game jam, invented a whole ass genre, had a bit of a breakdown because of bugs, then won a prize for my game ClickCraft. An emotional roller coaster to say the least, but let's back up. Just about 2 months ago, I said that I needed a break from game jams. They're pretty stressful, there's a lot of crunch, and I really just wanted to work on my own projects. But then Tommy reached out saying he loved my video on the last jam I did and asked if I wanted to be the first featured creator for the MicroJam. And I gotta say, that amount of flattery would get me to do pretty much anything. So I was in. The catch was that this jam is sponsored by GameMaker, so I had to use GameMaker for the jam. Whatever, that's fine, I'm a pretty smart boy. I can pick up an engine I haven't used in over 10 years and make an entire game in one weekend. Sure, what could go wrong? So this jam actually started for me about a week before, because I had to rapidly familiarize myself with GameMaker again after about 10 years. I haven't used GameMaker since I was following Heartbeast's GameMaker RPG tutorial, which is a crazy deep cut. Honestly, relearning it was pretty nostalgic. The UI still has the same vibes it did back then, so I was really taken back to my glory days when I first started learning how to make games, and just making a little guy move around on the screen was enough to make me happy. So I was enjoying myself. At first, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, the theme of this MicroJam was Island, and so I thought I would just submit my game House in Hand. That's a puzzle roguelike about building little cities on little islands that you can wishlist now on Steam. Just kidding. But it does feel sort of weirdly serendipitous, huh? For real though, the idea I couldn't get out of my head was some kind of RTS game, probably because I've been replaying Warcraft 3, which is one of my all-time favorite games. The idea I finally came up with was an RTS where you build your base on an island and defend it from waves of monsters. However, there's a twist. Instead of real-time strategy, this would be the world's first click-time strategy game. Time would only advance when you click. Now, I've since Googled if my game was actually the first, and I don't think it really is, but I can't find any references to the term click-time strategy, so I may have actually invented that term. Feel free to correct me or praise me for my genius in the comments. The first thing I did was import the assets, which is incredibly easy in GameMaker. I particularly like this auto tile helper thing they have. Godot has something similar, but this is just way more intuitive. Once the assets were in the game, I went about making it so you could actually click things. Again, super easy in GameMaker, you just make a left mouse pressed event and run whatever code you want in there. You're gonna notice kind of a running theme of things being easy in GameMaker, and that's because this engine is super intuitive and beginner friendly. To a point. Later on, this theme will change from "this is super easy" to "oh my god, I wish I was using Godot." The way I implemented the time only advances when you click feature was by making a global function called tick. Tick is just a random programming term for a small amount of time passing, like a clock ticks or whatever, but all this function does is just loop through every object in the game and run that object's tick code. Initially, I thought about tracking clicks globally, but I couldn't figure out how to distinguish between clicks on like trees and rocks and stuff, and clicks on UI stuff like the pause button or whatever. So instead of coming up with some clever solution, I just avoided the problem entirely. This is kind of a pro tip for game design in general, but specifically for jams. This is gonna sound a little obvious, but oftentimes scope creep can just be avoided by redesigning entire features. Instead of trying to figure out a system to block the tick function when buttons were clicked, I instead just avoided that work entirely by making the clickable objects run the tick function manually. But what if the player wants to advance time without clicking an object? Good question, thank you for asking. I added another button the player could click that just runs the tick function, and that's it. You see, I've saved so much effort just by changing how the game works. Obviously this isn't always possible, but I think it's a good idea when you come up against something really complicated to first consider if you can just redesign the whole system to make it easy on yourself. After I had my whole tick system in place, I made some trees and rocks for the player to click and harvest wood and stone. I added wheat as a resource at this point, but I didn't really have a reason for it yet. My vague idea was that food would limit your troops, similar to the food in Warcraft 3. Like I said earlier, this game is heavily inspired by Warcraft 3. I even call it ClickCraft as a little homage. The next iteration of the game will have a mod called Life of a Click Peasant. Just kidding, that's a little Warcraft 3 joke for my fellow unks. Next, I needed to implement units in the game. The units are very simple. They basically just look for a target. If they find one, they walk towards that target. If they don't find one, they just wander around aimlessly. If they're within attack distance of any target, they attack. Now, pathfinding is something I've done countless times and should be relatively easy, so of course everything went wrong and I had a ton of issues, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's talk about attacking. This is actually incredibly simple. If a target is within a certain distance from a unit, it will attack. That's it, no animations, hitboxes, or any complicated stuff, they just instantly whack each other. However, I realized very quickly that because everything in the game happens instantly, the units move to the next spot instantly, they attack instantly, etc., it became kind of hard to follow what was going on. I did this intentionally because I didn't want to have to wait for any animations or anything to be finished before the player could click again, especially because I originally imagined the game being kind of a spammy clicker. But as I developed the game, it became clear I needed at least some player feedback as to what was going on. In the spirit of the jam, I thought, what is the simplest, least effort way of doing this, and I came up with health bars for the units and just some floating text telling you what's going on. Nothing amazing, but I feel like it gets the job done well enough. Now that I had units and harvesting rocks and trees, it was time to implement player buildings. First, I made a woodcutter and a stonemason, which would just auto-harvest wood and stone. Then I created a barracks to create the soldiers. Remember how earlier I said I wanted the food to be a limiting factor on your soldier production? Well, I had the genius idea to create a farm building that creates a wheat field next to it, and you can harvest that wheat field, then the barracks would automatically consume the wheat to create a soldier. Then, in kind of one of those magical moments where a bunch of genius ideas convalesce all at once, I created the town hall, which would act as a way to upgrade your base, a tutorial, and the main thing you have to protect all in one. Basically, the game's tutorial would be you creating a town hall to teach you about the clicking mechanics. Then as you killed enemies, you'd earn gold that you could spend to upgrade your town hall, which would upgrade and unlock buildings, and if the enemies destroy your town hall, it's game over. This meant though that I couldn't spawn any enemies until you actually had a town hall, and I didn't want the player to just spam harvesting trees and rocks and delaying building the town hall, so instead I made a special tutorial tree and tutorial rock that you can only harvest once. These tutorial things also advance the text of the tutorial. This way, you're forced into going through the tutorial and placing your town hall before the game really begins. Originally, I was going to do this cool animation where the island would randomly generate out from the initial square, but that was way too hard. So instead, I just handmade a few random islands and did this little shrinking circle animation thing to make it seem like it was growing from the original square. It's not cheating, it's good game design. So back to the pathfinding I thought would be really easy, but was certainly not. The way pathfinding works is basically imagine a grid on your level. Each grid cell represents a spot that a character can move to. To add obstacles that your character will avoid, you mark those cells as unpassable. Then the pathfinding algorithm does some magic and gives you a path for your character to walk. The easiest way I found to mark spots as unpassable was just to block all spots that have an object on them. This way units wouldn't walk through buildings or trees or other units. And since I didn't want the characters to walk into the ocean, I thought the simplest way to block those spots would just be to add a bunch of wall objects to cover the ocean. This isn't too far off from how standard GameMaker games handle collisions, but this decision would come back to bite me in the ass so many times, so just remember this image of my map with all of these red squares all over the place. There was another issue with my pathfinding code as well. Basically, since buildings blocked the spot that they were on, the units would try to find a path to that spot, see it was blocked, and give up. Kind of dumb, but I couldn't really figure out an easy way to get units to navigate to adjacent spots, or like partially navigate to the spot, so instead I had to cobble together an absolute garbage ass function to get adjacent spots to a target. I then copy and pasted this all over the place because I'm an idiot and I don't care about programming best practices. Fortunately, this code, ugly and clunky as it was, worked pretty flawlessly. I mean, even a broke clock is right twice a day or whatever. I also quickly made an enemy spawner that just spawns enemies randomly on your island after a certain amount of clicks. At the end of Saturday, I had basically a full game. You could build buildings, harvest harvestables, kill killables, and upgrade upgradables, and that's definitely enough of that. Going into the last day, I was actually really confident. I was basically just going to spend the last day polishing and gloating about how great my game was. And if that's not foreshadowing for a hero's downfall, I don't know what is. Up until now, I'd been testing the Windows build of the game, but since it was the last day of the jam, I thought I'd get my web build up and running. This is when everything frankly just went to shit. The web build had so many weird bugs that I can't even explain all of them. The characters would navigate weirdly, clicks would sometimes just not register, the game would regularly crash, levels would take forever to load, the music would start playing like 5 minutes after the game had started, all sorts of weird stuff. Apparently because GameMaker is not statically typed, the web build handles dynamic typing different than the Windows build, which can cause a ton of issues. I'm not going to get into the specifics because I don't even know the specifics, but needless to say, shit was fucked. Most of my bug fixing boiled down to just doing random things Google told me, like changing how things were loaded in and whatnot. This was pretty soul crushing, I won't lie. I would try a solution I found on Google, test the web build, and a whole new thing was broken, and then I would try to fix that and the cycle would continue. The biggest thing had to do with all those walls I told you to remember earlier. For reasons I still can't explain, these walls were being like stretched to take up the entire screen in the web build, meaning the entire map was deemed unpassable by the pathfinding system. I couldn't figure out what to do about this at all, so I just deleted all of the walls from one of the maps and then rebuilt the entire pathfinding system. That's why there's only one map in the final game. I didn't want to do it to all of them if it wasn't going to work, and by the time I got it working, my spirit was sufficiently broken to lose motivation. Also, I ran out of time. I had deleted the walls, but I still had to make the oceans unpassable, so I had to programmatically check each spot in the game and see if it had an ocean tile or an island edge tile, and if it did, make it unpassable. This was just another garbage algorithm that fortunately worked well enough. So that worked to make the oceans unpassable, but I completely forgot about something. The enemy spawner doesn't do that same calculation, it just checks if there's an object in a spot to see if that spot's free. This results in enemies occasionally being spawned in the ocean, but since all the ocean spots are unpassable, they just stand there in the ocean. I didn't realize this was a bug until the game was submitted and people played it. My feelings about this can be succinctly defined as the shrug emoji. That's all I got. I was able to get a passable build working, but there's still a massive game-breaking bug that I could not for the life of me solve. Occasionally, the game just crashes to a black screen. Refreshing sometimes fixes it, but some people just weren't able to play the game at all because of it, which is a massive bummer. I went from so confident that this was a Game of the Year contender on Saturday to just completely dejected on Sunday. I think the game turned out pretty good despite everything, but it's just such a bummer that I spent my entire Sunday fixing stupid bugs only to not be able to fix all of them. That's game jams though, I mean high highs and low lows. So what are the results? Well, out of 89 submissions, my game placed 15th in the user voting, which means it was eligible to be judged by the actual panel of judges who decide the final winners. The results were, drumroll, third place in the GameMaker category. That's not too shabby for someone who hasn't used GameMaker in a decade. After the soul-crushing final day of the jam, I won't lie, it was pretty nice to actually win a prize for the game. I do genuinely think it's a good idea, and I'm glad people saw that. I never join game jams to win, but a little validation every now and then is nice. There's also prize money, which is cool. I won $20 and a certificate, but to be honest, I feel a little weird keeping the money, so I decided to double it for a total of $40 and donate it to ABLEGAMES, which is a really cool charity that helps people with disabilities find community through games. You can also donate your old consoles to him. I donated my old PS4 to him a while ago. So yeah, that was the MicroJam. Definitely the shortest jam I've ever done. I did have a lot of fun until the web build completely killed my spirit, but I do think the game turned out pretty well in the end. I also invented a whole ass genre, the click time strategy game, patent pending. If you want to play it, the link will be in the description, and let me know what you think. I'm considering rebuilding it in Godot just for fun, and also don't forget to like and subscribe and all that. Okay, bye.